Welcome again. We're here to talk about, again, the OMS 50-mile regulation today. Hopefully everybody received a copy of the agenda when they came in. I'm just going to run through it really quickly. We're going to have a very brief overview of the Office of Migrant Services by the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. So let's give us a brief overview of the regulation. We want to spend the most of today really in discussion, and we have a plethora of expertise in the room behind me here to talk about the different perspectives of this 50-mile regulation, what some of the issues are, what some of the opportunities are. We're going to hear from all these folks today. We're also going to have plenty of time for folks in the audience to participate. This is going to be a two-way conversation, and I'm just going to try to help make sure we stay on time and come out at the end of the day with some next steps for the group. I'm going to try my very best to keep us on time so we all get out of here at 6 o'clock. So do bear with me as I move everybody along so we stick to the time. Before we get started, I kind of wanted to go through our overall goals of the day. And then I have a couple of group agreements. So some ground rules for all of us as we participate in this discussion. A lot of us we're coming from different backgrounds, from different perspectives on this issue. So just want to lay some agreements amongst ourselves so we can all agree to them. And I want to make sure that you all are good with them. But first I'll go through the goals of today. And I also have them written in Spanish on the other side. Monica? Yes. Well, I'm not sure the folks that are hearing here. Your microphone. Oh, microphone. Okay. Test. Okay. I'm usually pretty loud, but it's a big room. All right. So we have three primary objectives today. The first, we really want to listen today. We want to listen to all the concerns and perspectives regarding any potential changes to the 50-mile regulation. Secondly, we really want to discuss, and so discuss is underlined here, potential opportunities and implications of any changes to the 50-mile regulation. And then we want to come out, potentially with some recommendations. What would be recommendations to HCD for consideration? As we discuss those and as we move through the agenda and trying to get to these goals today, I have a couple of group agreements here that I want to run by you all, and I want to get your buy-off on these, make sure we're all agreed that we're going to stick to these 4 things as we go through today. The first thing is to speak slowly and clearly. So as you can tell, we've got folks with translation equipment, we've got folks on the phone, we've got folks on the web. So we want to make sure everybody can understand and comprehend everything. So please speak slowly and clearly so we allow for everybody to comprehend everything. That rule goes mostly for me because I talk really fast. So please hold me to this. Let me know if I'm going too fast. The second is to seek clarity and assume the best. What do I mean by this? There's a lot of people in the room with a lot of different perspectives on this issue. What we want to do is if you hear something that doesn't sound quite right, something that you feel like doesn't land right, that you might even be offended by, we would ask that you ask questions to the person that may have made that comment and try to seek clarity in their perspective. So we want to ask questions and make sure we get to the bottom of people's perspectives. The third, and kind of the fourth too, the third one is step up and step back. I'm going to try to call on every single person in this room today. So if you're here, we're going to ask you to participate. But we also are going to ask you to step back if we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to participate. So we're going to ask you to use your discretion in how much space each of us takes up in the room. Again, that goes for me. Please hold me accountable to that rule. The fourth is to respect our time together. I do realize we're starting a little late. I'm going to try to get you all out of here right at 6. And with that, I'm going to keep each of these panelists here to about 5 minutes. I will be brutal. I'm going to do my best. And for the folks in the room, please keep that in mind. We really want to make sure everybody has an equal chance to participate. So we're going to respect each other's time. Are folks okay with these rules, this group agreement? I'm going to look for head nods. ¿Está bien esto? Perfecto. Okay. Thank you very much for going with me on that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lindy from the Department of Housing and Community Development to walk us through a brief overview of OMS.
Hello, good afternoon. On behalf of the department, I want to thank all of our panelists and all of you who are here participating with us. We're very excited to have this conversation. My name is Lindy Fudge. I'm the section chief in our asset management and compliance branch. I'm here participating on behalf of Enrique Munoz, the program manager, who's not able to be here today with us, unfortunately. That said, we do have here our OMS program staff. We have Juana Stupanon, Stacey Rogers, Jeff Oxel, and Lisa Montañez, translation persona there. To get started, we just want to provide you with a brief overview of the OMS program. So, the OMS program works with county housing authorities and nonprofits to operate and maintain housing for migrant farmers and their families. Currently, OMS operates 24 migrant centers, which include approximately 1,900 units, providing seasonal housing to over 11,000 migrant farmers and their families each year. So the mission of the program is to provide safe, decent, and affordable seasonal rental housing and supportive services to migrant farm workers and their families during the peak harvest season. Applicants must meet the following criteria set forth in the program regulations in order to live in an OMS unit. First and foremost, the applicant or the applicant's spouse must be a migratory agricultural worker. We will go more into the definition of this on the next slide. Next, there must be more than one person in the applicant's household, and all household members must be immediate members of the applicant's family. And finally, the applicant and their household must conform to the occupancy standards set forth in the OMS regulations, which basically specify the maximum number of persons per unit based on the So, So OMS program regulations define a migratory agricultural worker as someone who has derived at least 50% of their total annual household income from agricultural employment during the current or preceding year, or alternatively, someone who can produce evidence of a current job offer in agricultural employment. Next, the applicant's place of employment must be at least 50 miles away from their residence, such that it would require a round trip of more than 100 miles each day and prevent them from returning home. And finally, the applicant must have resided together with his or her immediate family outside of the 50-mile radius of the migrant center for at least 3 months in the previous year. And this is what's become known as the 50-mile rule. So this is a visual representation of the 50-mile rule under current OMS regulations. You see here in circle A, that represents the 50-mile radius around the place of agricultural employment. Circle B represents the 50-mile radius around the migrant center. And all the little houses there you see represents the permanent residences of our migratory farm worker families. So as you can see, the houses, I don't know if you can see color very well, but in circle A we've got some yellow houses. And families who live in those homes would be ineligible for an OMS unit because their place of residence is within 50 miles of their place of employment, and also closer to the place of employment than the migrant center is anyway, so it wouldn't really make sense for them to apply for one of those units. In circle B, we have some orange houses, and those living in that area also would be ineligible for OMS housing based upon the fact they don't meet the 50-mile rule requirement. They reside within 50 miles of that migrant center. The houses that are outside of the two circles, the green greenhouses represent the families that would be eligible for housing under current regulations because they meet both the 50-mile, they're both outside of 50 miles of the place of employment as well as the OMS Migrant Center. So basically, as Monica said, the purpose of this meeting is to solicit input from all of you who are here today, both in person and on the webinar, on the 50-mile rule and whether amendment to this regulation would ultimately benefit migrant farmers in California. So, today we'd like to hear things about what this change might look like, how we could potentially implement it, what challenges would there be, or what opportunities as well. And most importantly, how would we ensure, if we were to change the rule, how would we ensure that OMS centers would continue to serve migrant farm workers as the program was designed to? So with that, I'll turn the mic back over to Monica, and so we can hear from our panelists.
Thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and, keeping on time, we're going to hear from our panelists, and we're going to run down the line this way. So each of them will have about 5 minutes to give some of their perspectives on the regulation and changes and what some of the opportunities and implications are. After they talk for about 5 minutes, we'll take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Other panelists also, you can ask questions of your fellow panelists. We'll also try to bring the folks who are on the phone into the fold as well. We're going to do our best. So first I'm going to introduce Brian Augusta from the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation.
Thank you, Monica. As Monica said, I'm Brian Augusta, and I am the legislative advocate for the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. Down at the other end of the table is Eileen Jacobs, who works for a organization with a similar name, but we are different organizations. They're our sister organization, but the foundation was founded to perform sort of different work on behalf of rural and farm worker families. And the foundation, and myself included, our work focuses on both representing individuals that, let me back up, we are a nonprofit law firm that represents the interests of rural and farm worker families in California. And we work in the areas of health, housing, and employment, protecting the interests of rural and farm workers in rural areas. And we work in the legislature, which is something that, for example, CRA Inc. cannot do. So we do a lot of advocacy in the state legislature. We also represent folks who might not be represented by other legal aid programs, including folks who are undocumented. So my work focuses on housing policy in the state legislature across a broad spectrum, but of course including farm worker and rural housing. So we're here today to talk about the 50-mile rule, and I'm just going to provide a little perspective on that, a very brief perspective on it, but I want to lift up some other related issues. The debate here on this rule, which this is obviously not the first time that we've all had this discussion, and it's cropped up in the legislature in recent years as well. And really the crux of this debate comes down to what is the goal of the migrant housing program, the OMS program, what needs are we looking to meet, and how do we meet those needs while also meeting the needs of farm workers who live or work near one of our OMS centers. And I think the debate there's a lot of issues, but the debate comes down to the impact that this rule has on families who have school-age children and are really in a position of having to choose between potentially moving their kids out of school so that they can meet the requirements of the 50-mile rule, and or potentially affecting their ability to find housing when their OMS centers open again. But that also implicates the nature of the OMS centers, which are intended to house farm workers who are seasonal or migrant. And so it's temporary housing intended to house people who are traveling long distances, working during the season, and then going back to another place that's primary may not be the right word when you look at, the 12-month calendar, but another place where they live with their family. And so how do we balance those two? That's what this debate is about. I think the issue I really want to lift up is as we talk about that, I want to focus on the reason that we're talking about that and this very narrow issue, and that is because we have an enormous housing crisis in this state, and we face the situation in which a significant majority of low and very low-income workers and their families cannot find housing that they can afford in California, even in some of the lowest-cost rural areas of our state. People are priced out, and nobody is hit harder by that than farm workers and their families. And so we have been, one of the factors in that is that since 2008, between 2008 and 2014, we, the state of California, have lost about 69% of the available state and federal funding for the construction of affordable housing. That includes the loss of redevelopment funds, which took away about $1 billion a year statewide, cuts at the federal level, and really the exhaustion of resources here at the state level. Most importantly for this discussion, the Joe Cerna Farm Worker Housing Grant Program and the Self-Help Housing Program, both of which help to fund the construction of housing affordable to farm workers and their families. And we have been working at the state level, a number of us, to turn that tide, to restore that funding. And really, I think as we talk about meeting the housing needs here, as we debate the implications of this 50-mile rule, I think one of the most important things that we need to be thinking about is how do we expand that supply for all farm workers, for folks who are living permanently in an area and for folks who are traveling to work and then going back to another place to live. And there are a number of bills in the legislature to do that. With AB 571, which we're co-sponsoring, would expand. So we have a number of funding sources to expand the Farm Worker Housing Grants Program, to fund the tax credit program specifically for farm workers. And so it would be a wonderful outcome of this meeting if, in addition to whatever is talked with respect to the 50-mile rule, that we put a lot of the great effort that's going into this discussion into getting those resources. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Brian. I told you I was going to be strict.
I know it's going long. Don't give me a microphone.
Yeah. Any questions for Brian? All right, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Barbara with the Housing Authority of Stanislaus County.
Good afternoon. I'm the Executive Director of Stanislaus Housing Authority, which is a regional housing authority serving 8 counties and has 2 city housing authorities. We oversee migrant centers at the City of Empire, Patterson, and Westlake. Recently, a lot of our residents have let us know that there's been a lot of people going around collecting signatures, and there's a lot of confusion about today's meetings with our residents. Everything's come out that they're shutting down the migrant centers, that they're wanting to do year-round housing, and we've done our best. And so our resident councils in Empire and Westlake have actually sent letters to HCD, but unfortunately they didn't address the 50-mile rule because there was confusion as to what they were or weren't supposed to be supporting. So we anecdotally have talked to the resident council presidents. Also, we've talked to the agricultural businesses and the local cannery and farms. We spoke with other housing authorities and, of course, our own staff. After doing so, as you all know, I know that there are lots of different opinions, but there are a few things that we agree on, and that's likely the stance that the Stanislaus Housing Authority would take. The first thing is that we need to protect our migrant housing. Most of our farm workers are from Texas and from Mexico, some from Arizona and other states. And it's imperative for our economy, for the workers, and because of the housing crisis, that we do what we can to protect the migrant farm worker housing. In terms of the 50-mile rule, the housing authority, we're not sure that we need a to do away with the 50-mile rule. For us, the issue would be if waivers were available in situations regarding 3 sets of circumstances. The first would be medical. We've come across situations where we had farm worker family members that were going through dialysis or chemotherapy, and they really wanted to continue their medical care with the same medical facility or the same doctor, and we'd like to see a waiver for that to the 50-mile rule. The second is in case of educational situations such as graduating high school or junior college, or some of our farm workers have informed us in some of the schools in Mexico where they return that a child won't get credit for a whole semester unless they finish the semester out, so they'd like to stay for those. And that's, regardless of whether it's in our OMS migrant centers or in the 50-mile radius, we'd like to see an accommodation. The third situation is really because of the local economy and because of the farm workers themselves, and that's if there's continued work. We can't control Mother Nature. We can't control the harvest season. We can't always control when work happens. So for that reason, if work continues and we can document that, we would like to see a waiver of that. We can't take a strong stance for or against it because we're not being compelled by our residents to do that. Some other housing authorities have different situations with different costs, and so their opinions are different than ours. But from what we're gathering, if we can make accommodation to make things reasonable for our farm workers and support the local economy, we would support wholeheartedly a situation where we could do at least do waivers. But we're still listening, and again, we're still listening to our residents, to our staff, to our local farms, and to everyone. So I'm not only here today to speak, I'm here today to listen.
Thank you very much. Any questions or even comments based on what we've heard so far? All right. Saving it for the end. All right. To turn it over to Laura Nornella, the Executive Director of the Food Empowerment Project.
Thank you. This is a copy of the petition we delivered to HCD Director Ben Metcalf on December 9, 2016. It's not new or different. It's just that more organizations have formally added on supporting it. To this day, there has been no formal acknowledgement as to yet to our initial petition. As we all know, today's meeting is specifically about the 50-mile regulations. I feel it is difficult to do so without stating a few things first, as these are all realities that are impossible to ignore. Farm workers are not paid what they should be. They should be paid a living wage, not only because they deserve it, but because it is what's right. Farm workers need affordable housing, lots more. I live in Sonoma County where many farm workers are homeless. It's not a question of if it's important. I think everybody can agree it's incredibly important that we need more housing. That doesn't change anything by talking about the 50-mile regulation. We are looking forward to hopefully working with on AB 571 with CRLA. Food Empowerment Project and others in this room fight for living wages and have and will continue to fight for these and other rights with farm workers. But a child's education is also a human right. Literally a human right as an international declaration stated on December 10, 1948 in Article 26. Everyone has a right to an education. There should be no exceptions. Not in California, and not for people who work so hard and who put food on the plates of millions. We are at a time in our country where we must take a stand tall and proud for justice. Overtime for farm workers was a good start, and we must continue this progress by ensuring that we honor farm workers' children with a good and positive start. In 2014, our coalition was asked by HCD how many families were concerned about the 50-mile regulation. There's a slide. It should be shown. These slides are from a survey conducted by the Center for Farm Worker Families and the Human Agenda. As you can see, over 91% of those surveyed indicated they felt the 50-mile regulation impacts their children's education. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that over 96% of those believe their child would benefit from being able to finish the school year. All we are asking for is for the parents who want their child to be able to complete more of the school year, that they be allowed to do so. We are not asking that they be allowed to stay in the housing centers to complete the school year. Just as was stated by Barbara, a waiver, whatever it might take, The thing is, it doesn't mean these children won't travel if they continue the rest of the school year. They could still be migrants when they finish that school year, through the summertime. There's still ways they can, and their families can be considered migrants by these current standards if you can just allow them to finish the school year. A solution must be made to help ensure the success of these children. They deserve that right. Together we can and must find a solution. Farm workers are the most important voices at this table. And for those students and the teachers who could not be here, I will read a few quotes. Unfortunately, this meeting coordinated by HCD was done at such short notice, so we were unable to get the video and the audio properly given to the department. We do have that available for anybody who needs this. This is a quote from Emil Kessar, who teaches science at Access Junior High. Recently, I had 5 or 6 migrant girls in my class. Very sweet, very quiet, with D's and F's in all of their classes. They were quietly failing. That's one of the frustrating things. I would love to help one of my migrant students in. I could try the first few months of the year, but then I can't do anything more for him because he's not here. He'll probably end up dropping out of high school because he doesn't have the academic ability. He might end up working in the field. What these rules are doing is setting up a permanent underclass. The students are having a hard time socially, emotionally, everything. It's very, very detrimental. Students living in one of the state migrant housing centers who attend East Union High School were asked how it feels to live in the particular migration cycle required by the center regulations. In 2016, a student that was going to be a senior said, I've always told everybody I like my life going back and forth because I get to make friends over there and here. I meet new people. But then I wouldn't like that for the rest of my life because I've seen how I've struggled, and I wouldn't want, if one day I had my family, for them to struggle what I've been through. And another in 2017 stated, for me, it's all about school for me and my sister. We are in high school. I want to graduate. I want her to graduate. Our parents want us to both graduate. And we will try to do well in school, but moving every year makes it complicated. We lose time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Questions or thoughts? Can we have copies of the petition?
Yes.
Can we have additional copies of the petition?
Absolutely.
Here's one. I have one already.
I'll hand you that.
I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Lopez, and then I'll hand out a couple of copies of the petition with the Center for Farm Worker Families.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you and see you again. This is my 7th time coming to HCD to discuss this issue, and I've become so familiar with the freeway I could probably close my eyes and get here from Felton without even trying. I did a PhD many years ago, and the migrant camp, the Buena Vista migrant camp, was one of the camps where I interviewed farm workers. All farm workers, whether they're in the migrant camp or not, almost all, want their children educated and out of farm work. However, the people in the Buena Vista migrant camp complained bitterly about the fact that their children's education was interrupted and they were unable to be successful. In 20 years, there has not been one single graduation among 104 families from children who have followed the circuit as prescribed from the Buena Vista migrant camp. The only people who have managed to graduate are those from families who have a relative living year-round in another location. The child then goes and lives with that relative and with uninterrupted schooling during the year, and then graduates from that location. Nobody graduates from Watsonville who's been in the camp in 20 years. And I think this speaks a lot to a number of things. I'm concerned about undocumented workers being deported and having their families torn apart. Well, here we have a system set up that forces parents who want their children educated to be separated from their children if they want the children to be successful. I don't think this system is working. I do think one workable alternative would be for parents to have the option of, staying in the district in which their children go to school. And if they could stay in the district year-round so that they could complete the school year, then they'd have a chance at success. But the way it's set up now, thank you, I need some water. The way it's set up now, it's just not working. The children are not graduating, and what I see is that they either live with family members elsewhere and then graduate in that location, or else they become progressively frustrated with the school system and the fact that they cannot succeed. They drop out and join the gangs in Watsonville. And those are the two alternatives. They go on the street, or else they go with a family member. Now, not all parents of children in the migrant camp have other relatives where the children can stay year-round. So there must be a system set up so that these children can succeed. I just don't think it's working. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or anybody else from the panel if you want to respond, or you can also ask questions. Everybody has their statement. All right. Well, we're going to turn it over to Araceli with Buena Vista Migrant Center. She's going to speak in Spanish, and I think I will ask colleague Juan to translate. Is that okay? Excellent. Thank you. What I might do is ask, voy a preguntar si puedes dar un poco pausa para después que ellos puedan traducir. ¿Okay?
Buenas tardes a todos. Es mi primera vez aquí, un poco nerviosa. Estoy representando al campo Buenavista. Y yo quisiera, con todos mis compañeros, hubiera querido venir, pero estoy aquí para pedir que se olviden ya de esos, que se quite eso de 50 millas, porque eso afecta a nuestros hijos. Yo lo viví en mi familia.
She would love if this 50-mile rule would go away. It affects everybody, and she sees it in her family.
Mi hijo de 19 años, para poderse graduar, tuvo que vivir con mi hermana un tiempo para llegar a graduarse de high school.
Her son, at 19 years old, he had to live with one of her sisters so he could be graduate out of high school.
Si mi hermana no hubiera estado aquí, mi hijo no hubiera logrado graduarse.
If her sister wouldn't live here, then her son wouldn't have been able to graduate.
Quiero que sepan que es muy difícil para nosotros los padres separarnos por mucho tiempo de nuestros hijos.
It's very difficult for the parents be able to
de nuestros hijos. Separar nuestra familia, estamos separados.
Being separated from her son and her family. It's very difficult.
Y es que es la única manera de que ellos logren graduarse. De otra manera, o van a las pandillas o no hay graduados.
Because that's the only way that they could graduate. The other way, they either go into gangs or they won't graduate.
Este año, allí en el campamento, creo que no se graduó nadie que haya vivido allí en el campamento. Solamente los que se quedaron fuera, que estuvieron en diferentes ciudades o que vivieron con un familiar.
This year, nobody from the center graduated. Either they were stayed behind with a relative, or they went away to other cities, or they went to other counties.
Para mí es una lástima porque es difícil ver jovencitos en el field.
To her, it's very sad because it's very sad to see young people working out in the fields.
Es un trabajo muy difícil para nosotros adultos. Imagínense para jóvenes de 14, 15 años trabajar en el field.
It's very difficult for adults to do that kind of job. Imagine the 14, 15-year-olds working in the fields.
Por eso yo les pido que por favor nos dejen el campo para que los niños, los muchachos sigan estudiando.
So she asked that the migrant centers be left for the kids to continue their education.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Araceli? I'll try to yo voy a intentar traducir.
Mi nombre es Juana Barrera. Yo vengo del campo de Williams.
My name is Juana. I come from a camp in Williams.
Es muy cierto lo que ella dice.
It's very right what she says.
Yo en lo personal tengo tres hijos.
I myself have 3 children.
Tengo una niña que ya va a la escuela, otro niño que ya va a la high school.
I have one daughter who's in elementary school and one that's in high school.
Él no se graduó este año.
He did not graduate this year.
O sea, por lo mismo, porque emigras, si llega al campo, emigras, vas y vienes para México o ya sea otro lugar.
So when you migrate, you come to and from Mexico.
Y es bien difícil porque ellos no se quieren quedar con otra familia que no sean sus padres.
And it's challenging because they don't want to stay with another family that isn't their parents.
Independientemente de las niñas, bueno, a mí no se me hace un gran tema tratar.
It doesn't seem like a very big issue to me.
Y en lo personal también mi esposo, el campo nada más dura 6 meses.
The season, my husband works in the field, and the season lasts about 6 months.
Él tiene que renunciar a su trabajo.
And he has to go back to his work.
Porque cuando él se va a hacer el campo, no hay dónde quedarnos, no podemos pagar una renta.
Because when the season ends, there's no place to go. There's no place that we can rent that's close by.
Porque nada más se trabaja. Él no tiene la medical completa con un salario mínimo.
Porque él no completa la renta porque tenía un salario mínimo, so he doesn't have enough money because his wages are minimum and he does not be able to pay the rent.
Y pues yo no trabajo, somos una familia de 5.
And I don't work, we're a family of 5.
Y para pagar una renta de $1,000 y tantos dólares, en verdad que no se puede.
And to pay a rent is $1,000 and some dollars, then it's impossible.
Y a los niños sí les afecta mucho la escuela, el trabajo, porque mi esposo no lo tiene que renunciar antes y pues es un descontrol, la verdad.
And the kids are really affected because of the school and also my husband's work when he has to leave after 6 months.
Y pues a mí las niñas a mí se me hace bien, a mí se me haría mucho mejor que estuvieran abiertos mucho más tiempo los campos para que así pudiera completar la educación.
And I think it's very important that the centers be open more time. That way we have enough time to finish education.
Una última cosa. Yo ahí he vivido, tengo 5 años viviendo en el campo de Williams.
Another thing is I've been there for 5 years at the center of Williams.
Y no conozco a nadie que se haya graduado.
And I don't know anybody that hasn't graduated.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for backing me up on the translation. All right, and thank you very much. We're going to turn it to Lisa Baker with the Yolo County Housing.
Hello.
John? Let me try switching you out. Sorry.
Is this better?
There you go.
Hi. Muy buenas tardes. I'm Lisa Baker. I'm the CEO for YOLO Housing. And I think listening to the presentations and conversations this afternoon, I have to, and the thing that strikes me the most is the diversity of experience. And that should be no surprise because California is very diverse. And so is its agriculture, and so are its communities. And I think the,
pardon me, I'm so sorry. I'm going to switch your mic one more time because she can't hear. I want to make sure we get the chisel. And please speak into the mic. Thank you.
And I think that one-size-fits-all strategy is a very hard thing to do in California, not just for the diversity of its communities, but crops and types and the folks who are here. So I'd say the housing authority, we're a provider of all kinds of housing, and we are also work very strongly in housing policy and serve on a number of commissions and boards that are devoted to this, and we also believe in having not a one-size-fits-all option when it comes to housing either. So our migrant farm worker housing
is one strategy of many that we use in order to serve the people in YOLO. And part of that strategy involves public housing, part of it involves vouchers, part of it involves tax credit development, and also involves permanent farm worker rental housing and farm worker home ownership opportunities. And we're also very fortunate in YOLO to have nonprofits that also do USDA permanent farm worker housing. And so to some extent there is a little bit of a conduit there for folks between those who migrate and those who have to stay. And I do think that finding a way to have a continuum of opportunity is insanely important, especially given the very, very difficult and very real shortage of affordable housing or housing at any price point at this point in California for people. We're also very blessed because a lot of wonderful initiatives come out of YOLO, and in all of our centers we have after-school activities, we have school busing to school, we have, we're very blessed that we have our own 4-H club for youth, and our school districts have also taken advantage of the migrant farm worker education money and have created programs that ensure that children's education can now be seamless whether they're staying or going, of which we are very proud. And we are also engaged with Sac State University, which also allows your credit to go towards college graduation. And I was so excited in the last time I was in a center to see a young man who had taken advantage of it and who was actually at college in Sac State at this point. And I had been talking about the difficulty with completing school, and he himself corrected me that there was opportunity and that he was a really good example of that. So I think that within the existing program there are opportunities to actually expand some things that may be there which people are not necessarily cognizant, because there have been changes in some of the rules on education. But I want to talk a little bit about our folks, and I have some PowerPoints, because I think, again, talking seriously about why it can be different in different places, let's talk about our people. So one of the things about YOLO is we run a service-enriched program, and we run over 70 different social service contracts, many of those providing service, medical, dental, and educational services, as well as enrichment activities in our migrant centers during the season. And so here's YOLO itself. Our median household income is $54,000. Our per capita is $28,000. We're not rich. We have a 20% poverty rate, and the largest demographics in poverty are males and females 18 to 24. In terms of people who actually live there year-round, 88% are residents. This doesn't include undocumented. That includes folks with refugee status, legal residency, and others. And we can go to the next slide. So here's where our folks come from. 83% of folks come from Mexico, and 100% of them own their own home. Texas, 9%, 13% are homeowners, and some other places in California, and this is typically much farther north or in Southern California, 11% of those are homeowners. And in Arizona, 3% of our population comes from Arizona, 6% of them are homeowners. So by far and large, the bulk of our migrant farm workers are from Mexico, and they are all homeowners. Next slide. And this is what they do in YOLO for us. 83% of them are in straight-up agriculture, but in skilled and semi-skilled jobs, 8% in cannery, 4.5% in packing, and a very few working in nursery, hay, and trucking. So the average length of time, 30% or more have migrated for more than 16 years. 52% say that their parents were migrants, but 48% say they were not. And the majority of folks only have one or two folks in their household engaged in farm work. Most of the rest are children, and most of those are in school. And only 25% at this point actually follow a specific crop, because they're coming in providing skilled and semi-skilled labor, and many of them come and stay. And I will say that between 70 and 80% of all those coming into our centers migrate back to the same center on an annual basis. So we have a very high return rate. Current status of our centers, all three are full, and on opening day we had to place 23 families on wait lists. We have no H-2A visas. So that just gives you a sense that maybe our our situation is slightly different, and it just highlights a lot of the diversity that is in the community. I will say that I think that, and I've said this before, that there are changes that need to be made to migrant farm worker housing, especially the fact that we can't serve single workers, which is our largest underserved population, that the season is too short because, and our weather is now becoming too unpredictable. The season doesn't start at a predictable time based on weather, and it goes much longer than it used to. And the ability to have extensions for people with extenuating needs, whether it's the one individual at school or somebody who has a medical condition, would definitely be a couple of the things that would really, I think, help move the program into the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Sorry, I'm being aggressive with the timeline, but hopefully we'll have more time for recommendations and thoughts. Any questions from the audience?
I was just wondering, are any of those statistics specific to the migrant camps that are regulated, that have to follow the 50-mile regulations? Because you said some of it's housing ownership.
No, all those statistics are from our centers. None of those are from our other programs.
So when I said 100% ownership?
They own a home in Mexico. 83% of our...
So they don't own a home here.
That's right. 83% of everyone who comes into the center every year is from Mexico, and 100% of them are homeowners.
In Mexico.
In Mexico.
Okay. Yeah, any other clarifying questions or thoughts? Good check with, oh, is it IT lead? Okay, any questions from the webinar? Are we okay webinar-wise? Make sure they feel included. Maybe we'll move on to the next part of this. Oh, can you see it from here?
Yeah.
All right, while we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and set up our next speaker, Marta. Juan, I'm going to ask you to translate again, if that's okay. And Marta is with the Williams Migrant Center.
Por favor, dar un pocos pausas para que ella...
Buenas tardes.
Good evening.
Mi nombre es Marta Medina.
My name is Marta Medina.
A mi familia no nos conviene que cambie lo de las 50 millas.
To our family, it's not advisable that the 50-mile rule be changed.
Porque venimos de México y no alcanzaríamos casa ya cuando regresáramos al mismo lugar.
Because we migrate from Mexico, and by the time we get here, there would be no more housing available.
Pero yo también tengo 2 hijos.
I also have 2 children.
Y quisiera que mis hijos se graduaran.
And I would like them to be graduated.
Aprendieran inglés y tuvieran una carrera.
That they would learn how to speak English and they would have a career.
Gracias.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. Any questions for Marta or comments, thoughts? All right, I'll turn it over to Eileen Jacobs of CROA.
Thank you very much. I am Eileen Jacobs. I am a statewide director of litigation with California Rural Legal Assistance. For those of you who are not familiar with CRLA, as Brian explained earlier, we are California Rural Legal Assistance, Inc. The CRLA Foundation is a sister agency. They primarily do lobbying. We primarily represent low-income individuals and families and farm workers throughout rural California. And we do related advocacy with HCD and other agencies, as well as with the legislature as appropriate. I want to give a little bit of a background on some of our priorities, and then I want to talk a little bit about our historical representation of residents in the OMS centers. First, California Rural Legal Assistance has priority areas in housing, health, education, employment, and civil rights. As I said, we represent low-income individuals and families and farm workers throughout rural California. Our southernmost offices are in El Centro and Vista, and then we come up through the valley and along the coast to Santa Rosa and Marysville. I work out of our Marysville office, and I provide backup and co-counseling with all of our offices in housing, fair housing, and civil rights cases. We have an historical tradition and opened our offices more than 50 years ago to represent farm workers and to represent low-income families who are the most vulnerable residents in rural areas and who face inequality in the areas of housing, health, education, employment, and civil rights. We have a focus on the need for decent, affordable housing in rural areas and the need for decent, affordable farm worker housing in rural areas, most especially because migrant and seasonal farm workers, whether they migrate, whether they work seasonally, or whether they work year-round, tend to have the most difficult time in rural California having access to decent, affordable housing and a living wage and a good education and appropriate health care. We work to provide funding as well as decent conditions. We enforce individual rights, and we've done that with CRLA for more than 50 years now. I haven't done it for more than 50 years now, but it feels like I'm getting close. We see low-income families, and especially farm workers in rural areas, who are overpaying, who are living in crowded housing, who are living in what's euphemistically called unconventional housing. Unconventional meaning that they're living in garages, in backyards, under porches, under tarps, and old motels tend to a room and that are just really dilapidated motels along the road and Highway 99 and other areas where you all see them and don't necessarily know that farm workers are living there. We see farm workers in tool sheds, in barns, even in the remote national forest, in tents if they're lucky. We see farm workers in communities that have unequal access to good municipal services like water and sewer service and street lights and sidewalks and basic services that we all expect in our communities. And unfortunately, in ag areas, the ag industry has a workforce that is ready and available but has a very low living wage and lives in very substandard conditions. My time is running, so I'm going to skip some of the other comments, but I want to talk for a couple of minutes specifically about the OMS centers. CRLA historically has represented residents in OMS centers. We have historically petitioned for extensions of the season. We have opposed rent increases. We have been involved in individual eligibility disputes when there's a question of whether a family is eligible. We've worked with HCD to improve the conditions of migrant centers. Migrant centers exist because of the need for decent, affordable housing for migrant farm workers. And those are farm workers who are moving away from their primary residence in order to work. The OMS centers have eligibility requirements in order to ensure that housing is available and accessible to migrant farm workers. I think it is a mischaracterization of the eligibility rules to say that it requires parents to take their children out of school. That is not the intent of the eligibility regulations. The intent of the eligibility regulations is to ensure that there is migrant farm worker housing available. What we don't want to do is pit one group of farm workers against another. All farm workers need decent, affordable housing, and there needs to be an inventory of housing that is available specifically for migrants. That's why there are eligibility rules. There is no question that migrant children historically have faced educational challenges and need to have their education rights preserved and enforced. But I'm afraid that there will be unintended consequences to changing eligibility rules for migrant housing that will reduce the decent, affordable housing inventory available for migrant farm workers and their families. There are waiting lists for that housing. As Brian said when we started this panel discussion, there is a desperate need for decent, affordable housing, period, in rural areas and for farm workers, period. We should be focusing our attention on ensuring that there is funding, that there are local and statewide requirements to provide decent, affordable housing for farm workers who work year-round, for farm workers who work seasonally, for farm workers who are migrants. We cannot be in a position of thinking that one set of farm worker rights is more important than another when it comes to access to decent housing.
Thank you, Irene. I'm going to let you hold on to the mic and pass it moving forward. Any questions from the audience?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Cristian García. Yo y mi compañero venimos representando el campo de la Harley Lane de Uruguay. Y nada más que nada, pues sí, le digo a usted, la señora, pues que lo que la señora que... Pues como decía la señora, más que nada sí nos afecta lo que está pasando ahorita con los campos.
So he comes from the migrant center from Hardy Lane, and he says that it does affect them right now as the things that are going on at the centers.
Más que nada nos afecta a las personas que trabajamos año completo.
It affects the people who work all year round.
Las temporadas ya no son como antes, que venían un tiempo, trabajaban y se iban.
The seasons are not like before, where you used to work seasonal, and then it would finish and they would leave.
Ahorita los tiempos pues ya son otros. Yo soy una de las personas que trabajo todo el año.
Right now the times are different. He is one of the individuals that work all year round.
Me imagino que como yo hay muchas personas que sufren lo mismo.
He imagines like him, there's a lot of people that suffer a lot.
Entonces, pues sí, realmente sí nos afecta tanto eso como a nuestros hijos en las escuelas al tener que sacarlos.
So possibility it does affect him and a lot of people when they take out their kids out of school.
Porque al regresar ellos, regresan y ya regresan bien bajos de los que aprendieron el año atrás.
Because upon their arrival, they're already falling behind of last year.
Pues quisiera que por favor pues nos tomaran en cuenta lo que está pasando para que pues nos dejaran de pedir el campo como están hasta ahorita.
So if you would take it into account to leave the camps the way they are right now.
Así como nos están aceptando las pensiones, que sí igual para que no vernos tan afectados con este el corto tiempo que se va a cortar.
So leave the extensions how they were, that way the time won't be as short.
Pues más que todo, pues muchas gracias y esperemos sirva de algo esta reunión.
So if anything, thank you very much, and hopefully something comes out of this meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right.
Hi, everyone. My question is for Ms. Jacobs. So I understand your hesitation to pit one group of farm workers against the other and why that might be problematic. But what I don't understand is why we or why any of us should be satisfied with the status quo. So I'd like to ask you and others, if it was your children or our children, would we be okay with this regulation? I just don't understand why we should be willing to accept the status quo.
Thank you, and I agree with you that we should not accept the status quo and that it is an issue for all of our children and to have a decent education. I do not think that this rule is the reason that children do not have a decent education. And my concern, as I said earlier, is that changing this rule and doing nothing else will have unintended consequences for migrant farm workers who no longer will have access to housing, and will have unintended consequences even for extensions for the migrant centers. And I agree with the gentleman who commented earlier that the extensions at the beginning and the end of the season are very important. And I agree with the panelists who noted earlier that there need to be provisions for individual hardship waivers, and there need to be provisions for extensions and to address seasonal changes. My concern is that we look at one problem, we change rules based on one problem, and we don't address the real problem, which is the need for affordable housing for farm workers throughout the state and in all communities. And we have too many communities that are turning down applications to build farm worker housing, and we allow them to do that because there is not sufficient enforcement of the laws that apply. And we have a lack of funding for the farm worker programs that would provide year-round housing, even though, as Brian from the Sierra Lake Foundation mentioned earlier, there is, for example, a CERNA program that is for permanent year-round housing for farm workers that has not been funded by this governor and has not been funded by the state for many years.
I see. I'm going to go to Lauren first, and I'll come back to Lisa. Okay, Eddie, my question is for you. As somebody who in my life has always respected, one of my heroes is Frederick Douglass. And one of the reasons why I love Frederick Douglass so much is he didn't have this either-or option in his mind. He believed that you could fight for abolition of slavery as well as fight for the rights of women. And so in my view in all of this, it's not one or the other. So my question when you talk about unintended consequences is simply offering a waiver for those families who desire their child to have the education that they've sacrificed so much for, create unintended consequences. And when we talk about leaving one out and not the other, I guess I can't buy that, because it's our job, my job, everybody's in this room job, society's job to not say we've gotten this accomplished, to hell with the housing that's truly needed. No one's going to do that. I, for one, am not.
I'm not sure I know what the question is.
The question is why you see this, if you see a waiver creating unintended consequences that you're afraid of.
Well, I'm not afraid of anything. My concern is that if we change regulations that define migrant housing eligibility, that we will make housing unavailable to migrant farm workers.
The suggestion was a waiver.
Okay, I'm not addressing your petition, and I'm not.
Your petition, it was what this young woman said about wanting to have some type of waiver for certain types of criteria.
Yes, and my comment with respect to the other panelists beside you from the Santa Claus County Housing Authority who suggested that there might be reasons for individual waivers was to agree that I think that there are reasons for additional waivers when you have medical reasons. Kidney dialysis was a reason that she gave. I do not know whether a particular waiver in a particular case in a particular center is a good idea or a bad idea. So I'll address that. My concern that I'll repeat is that if we change a rule of general application to migrant centers, we have to be very careful that the consequence of that is not to limit the housing that's available to farm workers who truly are migrant farm workers and not farm workers who are no longer eligible for the centers, but who, because of unfortunate policies and practices in the state and in local communities, do not have housing available to them. I think those are both problems that we should be able to solve, and I have worked my entire career to solve both of those problems.
I'm going to go to Lisa Baker and then happy to come back.
I'm just going to go back to the original question, if I could. I think like all things, it's complicated. For one thing, for example, in my migrant farm worker housing, I don't know about you, but I would never want someone to live there in the wintertime. They have no heat. They're not insulated against the weather. And 2 out of our 3 centers are in a flood zone. And if you happen to be in Madison this last winter, you could get there in a kayak, but that was the only way to get there. The water was 3 feet deep. And those are not places where I would feel comfortable having people live year-round.
I didn't ask that.
And I'm going back to that, goes back to. So I think to some extent too, there have been some crossover between the idea of extensions, extending the season, which absolutely is necessary. The agriculture is changing, and part of the reason we're having so much angst today is that we're trying to grasp what the changes are that climate change is bringing us, as well as advances in farming, what that labor, and what that's going to mean for us, and we're in the middle of that and trying to figure it out. But any really good housing policy hopefully has an entire continuum. And there are farm worker tax credits, there is USDA money, and there is other money to do farm worker permanent housing and home ownership. And one would hope that the local jurisdictions are doing that. And if they're not, I think part of that is for us to hold those local jurisdictions accountable so that there is a continuum. Absolutely, extensions for hardship is very important, but I do think getting over the housing quality issue and then making sure that we're talking to our folks about the need across the spectrum is really important. Finally, if your school districts are not using their migrant education money because the law has changed to do so, then I definitely think that's another place where advocacy is required in those jurisdictions.
Go ahead.
Okay. I would just question why it is that the children aren't of paramount importance in this discussion. If that's the case about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and you've got the article, why aren't these what is it about these children that makes them less important than children in other neighborhoods? I really think we need to ask that, because I'm in the trenches. I go down to the camp all the time. I talk to different families. The same families have been returning to the camp for the past 20 years. There is no turnover. There may be 2 or 3 units out of 104 available, but there's very little turnover. So all of this really results in a punitive system that deprives the children of having a future and guarantees the next generation of farm workers. Now, this is not what the parents want. And I really think because they work so hard, they provide all of us with food, we ought to honor some of their basic desires. I'm very concerned because in the Salinas Valley now with chlorpyrifos, I have a PhD in environmental science. We have the worst environmental racism situation I have ever even read about. I mean, I won't go into the details, but it's bad. And I ask the same question about this. Why are these children any different than any other children? Why don't they have priority? What they need is year-round schooling, or the parents to at least have the option of providing that for them, not even by staying in the camp, by living outside with the family entire outside of the camp when it closes. Why can't they do that and then move back in? What difference does it make? I really think we need to grapple with why it is the children are not the focus here.
You know what, Brian, you had a comment, and then and then we have one question, and I'm going to ask a couple of questions to try to synthesize a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, I guess mine's not a comment so much as perhaps a question that some of the other panelists might be able to help me answer. So, if the rule were modified such that there was a waiver for families with school-age children, and you had a migrant center in which 100% of the residents are families with school-age children, then you would have a migrant center in which 100% of the residents are eligible for the waiver, in which case, by rule, they're not, these families, these households are not migrant households. They're living in that area year-round and using and having access to the housing during a certain period, but they're no longer migrant, by definition, migrant households. So then this housing would no longer be available to a household that was a migrant household, because it would it would be essentially become permanent year-round housing, even though it's closed for several months. So how do we address that issue? How do we, if we're going to take this center offline for migrant families, how do we replace, what do we replace it with? How do we continue to meet the needs of migrant families? I'm just trying to think that through a little.
Yes. Do you want to hold your question for just a moment? Kind of wanted to give some folks on the panel a chance maybe to respond if you have a response.
Yeah. Dr. Lopez might know better than me, but I'm not quite understand that if they were to stay in until, say, May when school's over, and they and their family then migrated to Michigan to do work, and when they came back to California, when the season picks up again, how are they not migrants then?
But they would be. But,
okay,
but your rule change would, I assume that family would not qualify.
Well, the school year ends. It's not a year-round school, so I think that they'd probably be done with school in May. Then June, July, August, I think then they could be traveling to go work somewhere else and then come back to California.
So I guess I thought the proposal was create a waiver for households so they don't have to move 50 miles or more.
No, the waiver would just say that the family is allowed to stay in the area so their children can finish the school year.
Yeah.
And then they migrate, and they're still able to go back to move to that labor camp because they have migrated.
It's actually the 3 months.
They're still 3 months, yeah, so they're still away for 3 months. They're still away from 50 miles, too, because they're probably going to go back to Mexico.
It's a timing issue.
Well, because the summer means they're not missing any school. So definitely it's a timing issue because we don't want the kids to miss school.
But if I understand the rule correctly, it's 3 months and 50 miles. So if your rule...
I think that would work, right? So the 3 months is...
Here. June until...
Yeah, let's think this out. Please keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if they end at the end of May, June, July, August, they come back, they start school again, they move out whenever the camp closes, they stay, all the family entire, in the district in which their kids are in school, and then when the camp opens again, they can come back, or they migrate to Mexico during the summer, June, July, August. 3 months.
If that's the picking season, when we discussed this with HPD before, one of the things that was discussed was that this is actually 100% arbitrary. That they have no legislative history to indicate where 50 miles even came from or where the 3 months even came from. There's absolutely no history to document where they came up with that. So the thought was that this 3 months is arbitrary. Could that time then mean a shorter amount of time, say in December? So if the camps close in November, could the kids migrate then in December through January, so they're gone like a month and a half, and they're back to when school starts? So that they're actually able just to finish the school year. So they migrated over 50 miles, and they shortened the amount of time to be a month, so they have migrated away, so that they're only missing the break in between during the holidays.
Really, just a month.
Yeah, but again, since it's arbitrary, since the 3 months, no one knows where that or the 50 miles came from, that is something that could be changed.
Yes, I think so.
Keep the brainstorm going, please. Yeah.
So, whenever you draw a line, when you're making a regulation, there's going to be people on one side of the line and on the other. But I think the genesis of the rule, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong here, but the genesis of the rule is how do we define what is migrant? So if a person is not traveling a long distance and they're living most of the year in the area, it's just a question, is that a migrant family, is that not a migrant family? That's just a question.
Well, I just like to say that I think the rule may have been useful when mostly men were leaving Mexico. The border was porous. They came, they worked for a period of time, and encouraged them to go back to their families in Mexico. And that, around the turn of the century, that was the case. And then it would be, I think, even beneficial. However, now, with whole families migrating, we must consider the well-being of these children. We cannot lose this human potential by having them go into the Watsonville gangs. And that's what's happening, unless they're separated from their family members, either of which is not a good choice. And I'm sure we can come up with a solution to this. I have no doubt. I mean, it may be altering the regulation, altering the 50 miles or whatever to keep everybody happy, but I really think we need to focus on the well-being of all of these children, hundreds of them in these camps.
I'm going to turn to Barbara, and then I'm going to take it back to Saxby, who's waiting patiently.
When we spoke with our families in the migrant centers, their concern, and again, I'm not disagreeing with anybody, but their concern was, especially for finishing out the semester specifically, not always the full year, because most did migrate to either another state or to Mexico. And so what they wanted to do was be able to live within the 50-mile radius specifically so that their children could finish out the semester. Because many do transition to schools in other states and other communities. And so I guess I didn't want to lose that point that not all were asking for anything full year or the full distance. They just wanted, in those situations, they wanted to finish out because there are different school ending periods depending on which school their children went to. For us, the winter isn't an issue because we have 22 units with heaters and air conditioners, and so we have a fallback on that. But again, the issue that was brought up, because most of our families brought up the very thing that the lady from Sierra Lake said, they're afraid that any change is going to lead to a transition of housing for non-migrant workers, and we didn't want to go there. But their concern about education, and I'm trying to listen to our families, was the end of the semester, so they could transition or transition to another school and not be penalized just for ending the semester.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to we're going to have one question from representative from Sacramento Bee, and then for the folks on the webinar, we're going to go to you. We'll read some of your questions and get those responded to. So go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sergio Lopez. I'm with the Sacramento Bee. I'd just like to ask a clarifying question, really getting on the panel to make sure I'm understanding the issue correctly. I've heard a lot of uncertainty about the kind of unintended consequences that changing this potentially could bring. My understanding is that California, though, is the only state out of the many states that have migrant housing that has this 50-mile regulation. So do we know anything about whether these other states have seen these consequences? Don't we actually have, so to speak, the test cases, the data already to see how this would bear out?
Anybody would like to respond to that in terms of
I'll say something in response to that. I don't necessarily think I can answer your question fully, but California is one of the only states that has migrant housing that is state funded. So I'm not sure that there are other states that could provide a comparison. We are very fortunate in California to have state-funded migrant centers. We are very unfortunate in California to not have a sufficient number of state-funded migrant centers and to not have sufficient housing for migrant farm workers or for year-round farm workers. But I'm not sure that there is a good comparison because most states aren't near where California is in even providing the housing.
I'm going to come over here first, and then I'm going to come back to Lisa. I'm going to ask for your microphone so I can have translation. Thanks for bearing with me running around.
Bueno, a mí no me gustaría que cambiaran las millas porque yo obviamente sí emigro. A mí lo que me gustaría en lo personal...
Well, to me, I really wouldn't like the program to change the 50-mile rule because I'm a really migrant.
Es que hubiera una extensión porque las casas no tienen calefacción.
But in reality, what would help would be the extensions, more time, because the houses could not have heaters.
Creo que ya no serían inmigrantes.
And then that would not make us migrant no more. That's it.
Lisa responds, and we're going to go to the web.
Go back to the Sacramento Bee question, echoing what Eileen has to say. In one of the few states that does have migrant farm worker housing, and one of the results of that is that if you've been watching it play out in the media, a lot of other states are having a very hard time getting sufficient labor to
to work in their fields. And in addition, California is highly dependent on agriculture. It is really the economic engine for the state in a very real way, and this is one way in which we are able to support that industry, which supports all of us as well. And I think that's really important. I do think the unintended consequences of not having extensions is exactly what Barbara said. Children have been able to finish out the semester because they've gotten the extensions, which will coincide with the end of the quarter and the semester, and eliminating extensions will have an educational impact on our families that they have not had to deal with in the past.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to go first to the web for just a little bit, if we can pull up the questions online.
So in order to ask a question or send a message to the presenter, I'm going to show a little demo for anyone who is online on the webinar.
Are we thinking of solutions?
Yeah. So hopefully everyone can see, if you're using the application on the computer, you're going to have to click on participant, and you'll have the option to send a note to all presenters. And there you can type in your question, and we'll be able to see it, and we'll hopefully be able to answer it in an orderly fashion.
And there are already some though, right?
Yeah, and at the moment right now, we're going to turn off broadcast mode, so anyone speaking will be able to say something. However, we'll hopefully keep this in order.
Yeah. So we're going to go to the phone.
All participants are now in interactive talk mode.
All right. So folks on the line, do you have any questions? You can ask them now.
I have a quick question.
Disculpe que están en español, ahorita vamos a aprender el deporte para ti. Ok, ¿ya puedes hablar? Miguel.
¿Está conectada la línea? ¿El teléfono? Sí. Estás en Medicina. ¿Tienes una pregunta?
Sí, mire, yo me llamo Pedro Márquez.
Pedro Márquez, ¿de dónde hablas, señor?
Estoy hablando de acá, de Nubo. Del norte, allá arriba.
¿Del centro migratorio de Nubo?
Y esta gente que ya tiene trabajo todo el año.
People have work year round.
No se queda ya en la comunidad.
The community and the units available for the people that do migrate.
Could you repeat that one more time?
If the workers year-round, and they have kids in their community and the housing available for the one migrating.
That question makes sense to the I want to make sure Anatolia is not that for
the workers that work year-round and have families or their kids are in school, why don't they just move out into the community and leave this migrant center available for those that do migrate?
¿Te puedes responder a esta pregunta? La cosa es que como nosotros no tenemos, yo personalmente tengo trabajo Entonces no me la temporada viene siendo $10,000 y $11,000, $11,000 luego vas a pagar una renta de $12,000.
Okay, what she was saying is basically is that, sorry, basically she's saying that she doesn't work year-round, and with what she makes, she wouldn't be able to afford a rent out in the community. Maybe if she did have a job that was year-round, maybe that's an option she has, but at the time, she only brings in about $11,000 a year, and that's not going to be able to pay for housing.
All participants are now in listen-only mode.
Back to muting the phones, and we'll go to the web. We'll see how we do with that. And for those who are manning the computers, we can scroll up to the questions. We'll just see. We'll take a gander here and see if we've got some questions here. All right, if we could go to the top, actually, that would be great. Make sure we get it. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to read them. We've been soliciting that we leave the centers open for 9 months with extensions.
Break it down in English too.
Oh, we wrote it down in English too? That would be helpful. My brain is moving as fast as it can. Okay, I'll read it out loud so folks can hear it. Due to the issues mentioned is why the extensions are so important, because that way we help our children stay up to date with school and with the regulations of the migrant program. So expressing support for the extension. I think that's the main comment there, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for bearing with that. We want to make sure everybody's able to participate. Lauren, did you have?
Well, I just wanted to know, is the extension something that CRLA would have concerns about unintended consequences if extensions were given to those families who desired for their child to finish, say, the semester?
Do you want to?
Okay.
So I think the issue from our perspective, and maybe Barbara can corroborate, is that prior to this year, we were able to have, if the majority of residents voted, we could have 2 extensions. But now we've been told that that's contrary to the statute, and that we're not going to be able to have extensions even if the season is still ongoing, and even if the semester for school hasn't closed out. This is causing angst, which is a lot different than having individual extensions based on the school year.
I would agree with
The CRLA.
Go ahead, and then I'll come back to Barbara.
So, okay, Barbara, did you want to?
Oh, go ahead.
So I would just say that from CRLA's perspective, we currently represent residents of 3 centers who are seeking extensions. And we have asked HCD not to change its policy from what its policy was in the past. And we think that the current interpretation of the statute with respect to extensions has changed and doesn't need to. That's all I can say about that.
I would agree with Lisa. Extensions typically cover the semester issue, and in all fairness, there's been a new interpretation. It's not necessarily HCD staff, because they've always been very good with us to work with us in the extension and made the process fairly easy. Typically, at the resident council meeting, signing the petition and turning it in. So they haven't had a complicated process. They've just had a new interpretation of the ruling. And so for us, when I mentioned the waivers, and I guess I didn't mean to open a can of worms, but those were individual situations. And usually the waivers or the anecdotal situations that the families gave us, again, centered around medical care or the continued season we heard about. Let's say there's 2 or 3 more, weeks or months of work, or in education situations, it's not the end of the semester. It's if somebody's graduating and they can only get a class, or they have to get specific to finish out and get that. So the extensions did address, for the most part, what our families wanted in finishing the term. The term seemed to be what was important. The waivers would go to specific examples is what we were recommending.
So I have a quick question for the panel. In terms of, and Dr. Lopez, you brought this up. So I'm sure this varies across all the different migrant centers depending on where they are, but are most children having to return back to, would you say most people are having to go back to, for example, Mexico or something to complete school and they're splitting time, or are they having to move, within the U.S. or within this state just outside of the 50 miles? What do we see happening? What's the combination of things we're seeing happening with the students themselves, the way things are right now?
The Buena Vista Migrant Camp, they come back in May 1st, so that's the end of one school year. Okay. And then they can be there until the end of November.
End of November, okay.
So that's the beginning, essentially, of another school year. Most of them go to some location near Highway 5, which is exactly 50 miles away, and live in ramshackle, inexpensive apartments until they can come back to the season. So that means they go to 2 schools, minimum. Now, I have talked to parents whose children go to 4 schools in 2 countries, 2 languages, and 2 cultures every year. And those kids never make it. None of these kids make it. And I just think we need to take that into consideration. These children are important. They should have futures.
So if we were, let's say the regulation changed, we took it from 50 to, let's say, 5. What would likely happen with those families, considering that we still have a migrant housing system, and they have? So what do you think would happen?
My guess is that some, not all, but some of the families would take advantage of the fact that they have an option to stay. Other families would elect to continue migrating. So I think you'll have a mixture, but at least those parents like Araceli and her neighbors and the people I've been listening to for 20 years that are adamant about their children's education can both live with their children while they're being educated and not have angst about having to leave and go to another school and have their kids fall further and further behind. This is typical, and it's great for guaranteeing the next generation of farm workers. But this isn't what.
So just again, and I'm new to thinking through this. So thank you for walking me through it. So folks would be able to find housing wherever they could find housing, as long as it was in their district.
Right.
Okay, like their school district, which is what
That's what I would like. Yeah. The option, not the requirement, the option that they have that ability, because some of these parents, that's what gets them up in the morning in the field. People do not realize that is the thing, thinking that their kids are going to have a better life, their kids are in school, and if they work in the fields and feed the kids, they're going to watch their kids get a better future. And then what do we do but frustrate that system with the 50? I think it's unjust.
And those folks would still continue to come back to the migrant center during the seasonal months.
Yeah. But I don't think you're going to have everybody, all migrants, taking advantage of the option. You'll have probably a mixture.
I'm so sorry.
No, but I think that they should have that option.
And you were saying for most of the center that you work with, most of the folks return every year?
Yes, the same ones. There's about, out of 104 units, there may be 2 to 4 that are available for other families.
Okay. Thank you for watching that.
Sure.
What is your, from the panel, we've heard a little bit about unintended consequences, and I kind of just want to dig into what do we mean when we say unintended consequences, more specifically.
Well, everything I just told you, I'm sure, is an unintended consequence. But I think it needs to be put on the table and addressed. It's very serious.
Anybody want to speak to what might be an unintended consequence of that scenario?
since it's my phrase that's been adopted, I probably should speak to it. And as I said, and I will repeat, my concern is that changing the rules of eligibility for the migrant centers will mean that we will have migrant families who will remain on waiting lists and never be eligible for housing that is specifically designed for migrant families. And I think it fails to address the actual need, which is a desperate need for decent, affordable housing year-round for farm workers who live year-round in all of the ag communities in this state, and an increased need for additional OMS centers if, as Lisa pointed out, there were families already on the waiting list when she opened this season. So I think that we have needs that may not be addressed and aren't being addressed as a part of this discussion. And I think that if the consequence of changing a rule is that we reduce the inventory of housing available for migrant families, then we haven't accomplished anything.
Can I go to Lauren, and then I'm going to go over here. So 100% agreed on the need for affordable housing for farm workers and frankly for everybody in California. But my question to CRLA is, will you even entertain the idea of trying to come up with a solution that we can do both? That we cannot deprive children of their education because of this regulation? I mean, is there any way to entertain the idea that you would try and help come up with a solution that we can do both?
Rather than either or.
We'll get over here too.
Okay, I'm fine to speak to that question.
I don't think I need the microphone for that, but I mean, the short answer to that question is if HCD asks CRLA to sit down and work with groups to come up with a solution to the problem, CRLA will be glad to sit down with HCD and any groups to try to come up with a solution to the problem. As I said earlier, I think that it is the right problem and perhaps the wrong solution that has been suggested. I also have a question for HCD, and that is whether they have heard from other centers, because we heard from a very limited number of residents and centers, and I would like to know if there are others who have expressed a viewpoint.
Four of them, the biggest migrant centers.
I guess I would be the most indicated. I am the representative that goes to all the opening and closing of the resident council meetings at all 24 migrant centers. And since the invitation letter went out, I visited 2 migrant centers, and out of those 2 migrant centers, the question did come up about this meeting and what was the agenda and what we were talking about. So when it was discussed and it was explained about changing the regulation of the 50-mile rule, an explanation of going down lower or allowing individuals, migrant families to stay in the area, their biggest fear was that of eligibility the next year of not having a housing for migrant people, like we just heard. Yes, it's a big thing about education and their kids, you know, being able to be educated and also finishing and graduating and going on to having big careers. But I think all of them said, I know all of them said that the issue here was not the distance, but the time. All the migrant centers that I visited, that's what I get from the residents and the resident council and also managers there at the migrant centers. It's not about the distance, it's about the time.
Yeah. I guess I have one question as far as, so if folks were, for example, have the ability to move less than 50 miles away to keep their students in the school district, what would be their incentive to return back to the migrant housing if they were able to find housing in the district already? Like, would you see people still having a need for that housing?
Well, many of the people in the camps have homes in Mexico. Araceli has a nice home. Many of them do, so they want to return to those homes. It's not like they're homeless or they don't have places to go. It's just all they want is their kids to finish the school year. Yeah, so they're happy to migrate. Tell me a time in the school year, or not in the school year, but during the year when you want me to migrate more than 50 miles, I'll do it. Just don't have it during the school year. Right, Araceli?
Yo lo único que quiero es aclarar que no quiero quedarme con la casa. Yo tengo mi casa en México y estoy feliz de regresar a mi país cuando se terminen los estudios de mi hijo. Pero que se quede por lo menos la temporada que quedaría en la escuela para que él tuviera la oportunidad de estudiar. Es lo único que pido. Gracias.
Right. We have about 5 minutes left. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of comments. Gordy de Necochea, and I date back to the program at its inception at EDD as the first chief office of migrant services, and over the years I had the opportunity to visit all the migrant centers. During the time period that housing was really designed for 5 years, and it was totally dilapidated. Single wall construction, no foundation, bathrooms outside. And over time, we were able to rebuild, reconstruct all these migrant centers, including daycare and infant care. One thing I haven't heard today is Migrant Ed, the State Department of Education, they also have Office of Child Development. And we refer to them as escuelitas, adult schools for infant care, daycare. All of that was also part of the migrant center. And we were very proud that we had new housing, primarily duplexes. But I just want to point out that there are a lot of other factors that play into this. And I'm hearing a lot of things that I know are correct. And I know, for example, that half of the migrant centers, 12 of the 24, received federal funding. They were built with federal funds. And federal requires different things. And when they were built, for example, they were not built to a year-round permanent standard. We got waiver. Also, we didn't have to pay school impact fees. The federal government was very concerned when we allowed the different local agencies to pick an alternate way of housing people. For many years, it was first come, first served. It caused a lot of problems because people would arrive 2 weeks ahead of opening day. And opening dates were always picked by the tenant council. They decided when to open camp. And it caused lineups of over 100 cars. In those days, it was just significant supply-demand issues. And so in meeting with CRLA, we decided that we would allow an alternate method, and agencies began to offer a pass, a priority pass. And that's why when you hear about Buena Vista, you hear that most of the people are returning because they have priority and they come back. Now, the issue I see is that there are a lot of factors. First and foremost, it is a migrant program, as has been stated here, I think, enough times. And even if in your mind, and you thought of, well, what is a migrant ag worker? It's really somebody that can't go home after work, be it 100 miles or more. If in fact you didn't have something that got at that, and you picked any other time or mile, 5 miles, 10 miles, you would have then the locals applying for the housing, and migrants, true migrants, would not have a house. And so it's very important that it is migrant and that financially the state provides general funds, and then there's rent income, and you can only house people for 180 days. When you get into extensions, that's very important. We've seen in the past, though, that when you get into extensions, there has to be work in the area, and a lot of people forget it is a work program. EDD statistics still tell you the peak harvest time is that 6-month period. It was designed to accommodate that.
I'm so sorry. I'm just asking you to kind of wrap this. I'm just going to
I'm just citing that there are a lot of factors. Some of it is the sewer system. Like at Davis Migrant Center, they have evaporative ponds, Harney Lane, the gentleman that talks from Harney Lane, evaporative ponds. You need off-season to deal with those ponds.
Well, you know we're not asking
Yeah,
that they...
right, yeah. And what I'm hearing, though, is I guess I have interest in seeking more information, especially from the people that run the daycare infant cares.
Pardon me, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, but please stay for a little bit. Feel free to hold on to the mic. We have 1 minute. I would like to do rapid fire, one sentence summary for each of our panelists of what you'd like to see, what you would recommend to HCD as far as the 50-mile regulation. If you could just summarize your opinion and your recommendation in 1 sentence. I'm going to start on this side. Please pass the mic, and we'll have HCD describe the comment period that's going on right now.
1 sentence isn't, of course, but I guess I would summarize it with more discussion around this issue about timing versus distance.
Thank you. I should have given you the assignment in advance. I'm sorry.
My 1 sentence would be listen to our families with not changing the rules, but allow some waivers, and thank you to HCD for allowing the forum.
I'd like HCD to remember that all the camps are different, as was stated earlier, and so maybe certain camps need different types of privileges, extensions, whatever you might call them, so HCD can say if they really do or do not believe in the education of these children.
I would like to see HCD make the education of the children a priority, and that parents who have children that they want to complete the school year have the option of living outside the camp for whatever period of time it takes for the children to complete the year, and then they can migrate if they choose.
Lo único que pido es que piensen en nuestros hijos y en la mejor educación para ellos.
The only thing she's asking is to please think of their children and the best for them.
Thank you very much. I express my thanks to HCD for being a great partner and hosting the forum, for you for your work, and all the behind-the-scenes guys down there in the corner doing a great job.
Special shout out.
And my 1 sentence would really be to echo what Brian and Barbara said. So more discussion about this, taking into consideration time versus distance, and really expressing a plea, actually, for just more affordable housing in a continuum in this state.
Solid sentence.
Run on.
A las familias que no les convenga estar en esos campos migratorios, que den la oportunidad a otras familias que sí cumplan con todos los requisitos para llegar allí a los campos.
So the families that don't meet the requirements and don't need the migrant centers, to please leave room for those that are actually migrant and coming to provide assistance for themselves.
And I would like to echo Lisa's thanks to HCD for holding the forum, for inviting all of us, and to all of the staff who are working so hard at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening before a holiday weekend. And that's part of my sentence. The rest of my sentence is that I would like HCD to focus on increasing the funding and the inventory for migrant centers as well as for permanent year-round farm worker housing.
Thank you very much. Let's turn it to HCD real quick to talk about the comment period that we have going on, and then we will wrap. I apologize, 5 minutes after, but we'll get you on the road where you need to go.
Right. So as you may be aware, in addition to the meeting this afternoon, the department is also accepting written comments through July 14th. The department's address and email address are up there as the PowerPoint. Also, I just want to thank everyone for their time today. I think this was a very informative and thought-provoking conversation. And want to extend a special thanks to our moderator, Monica, who I think did a fantastic job facilitating.
Sorry, just a really quick question. What does HCD intend to do with the information gathered from this information period? Can we expect like a timeline, like for a decision or something?
Sure, good question. So next steps. Once the public comment period has ended after July 14th, what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate all the comments that we received from this meeting here today, along with the written comments we received, and then at that point we will determine what the next steps are. I think the first most immediate next step after that process would be to put out something in writing to all of you who have attended and participated in this process, a summary of what we heard and, what the department intends to do going forward.
I really want to echo there are 24 centers in the state, and each of them have very different needs and very different residential terms, residential seasons, and I think that it is essential that UCD speaks to representatives from each of those 24 centers before making any kind of next step or decision. They may not send you an email, so you have to do the work to go to them if you're going to be changing a policy that could really drastically affect families now and into their future.
All right, with that, thank you everybody very much for your time, and have a good holiday weekend. Thank you.